Hello and welcome to the world-famous and award-winning Driving You Crazy podcast. This is the show where we talk about all things transportation, anything that gets you from here to there. I'm the traffic anchor and the transportation reporter for Denver 7 News, Jason Looper, and if you would like to be a part of the show, you sure can give me a call on the listener hotline. The number is 303-832-0217, and I have all my contact links in the description of the show. Now, back in high school, I had a friend who wanted to learn how to be a pilot. So we were invited to do one of these test flights at one of the local airports. It's a little Cessna airplane, probably like a 172. Very popular with young pilots because they're easy to fly. And during the flight, the pilot that was in control of the aircraft that was giving us this test flight did some of these roller coaster moves and basically gave us a really brief feeling of that weightlessness. You would come up out of your seat for a few seconds, and you get that feeling like your stomach's going to be coming out of your mouth. It was neat, but that is baby steps compared to flying on G-Force One. It's a modified Boeing 727, and it's used for zero-gravity flights. It's flown by a company called Zero G, and they're a privately held space entertainment and tourism company with the only commercial opportunity to experience true weightlessness without going to space. Now, joining me now to talk about that experience and this type of adventure is Kevin Sproge. He's the new CEO of Zero G Space Tourism, and Kevin is a former U.S. Navy test pilot who also served as head of commercial astronaut training at Blue Origin and director of safety and mission assurance at Sierra Space. Kevin, thanks so much for being here on the world-famous Driving You Crazy podcast.
Thank you, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here. It's as I was looking up your podcast, it looks like you are the only transportation focused podcast out there. So really neat to get to do this.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, I think I am about the only one. I don't think anybody crazy enough to want to do these many transportation issues and and interviews that are out there. I really appreciate you doing this. You started off in the Navy as a test pilot, right? So what made you interested in being a pilot? Do you like to be around planes when you were a kid? Would you play with planes? It was something that fascinated you?
Oh yeah. So my parents are native New Yorkers. I was actually born in the Bronx. Lived in the city. And when I was about 8 years old, they took me to the Intrepid Air and Space Museum on the Hudson River in New York City.
Yep.
Actually, I think it's on the East River.
Yeah.
And we went on the ship, and at the time they had a whole display in the hangar bay. I still remember, I could see it in my mind. It was all of the Navy astronauts from Mercury and Apollo and Gemini. So Alan Shepard and Jim Lovell and John Glenn, all these guys. And I walked off the ship that day, and I looked at my parents, and I said, okay, here I am, 8 years old. I got my life planned. I'm going to go to the Naval Academy. I'm going to go be a Navy test pilot, and I'm going to go be a NASA astronaut. Got 2 of the 3 so far, still working on the third one. What's really exciting these days is you don't have to necessarily go to NASA to be an astronaut, which is hugely exciting in our whole industry. But yeah, that's how it started.
Yeah. Did you go through the training to be an astronaut? Obviously you're a test pilot for the Navy, so you had to have some flying chops, and I'm sure you were working probably towards that goal, right?
Yeah, so every time a class comes out, NASA recruits specifically from the test community, the Air Force and Navy and Army test pilots, and so every time the class announcement would come out from NASA, we'd be invited to apply, and I made a couple of the cuts a couple of times on classes, but never quite made the final cut, but. I don't consider necessarily that a failure, because the just phenomenal people that NASA recruits and hires to be astronauts. And I have several friends who are active duty astronauts now. And one of them's out on orbit. Matthew Dominic was one of my junior officers when we were in the Navy together. And he's on ISS right now. So
cool.
Doing great work.
I would have a problem with the bathroom arrangements. I'm a pretty big guy, Kevin. and so, not that I'm eating a Taco Bell every night, not ever really. But still, I'm a big guy. I would have a problem with the facilities, if you know what I mean.
Well, what's really interesting is the ISS bathroom is notorious for various reasons, none of them necessarily good.
Right.
Our airplane has actually done testing research on design improvements to make that thing work better, and for future iterations for real long duration space flight, like missions to Mars, missions to the moon. So in addition to the tourism piece of my company, we actually do extensive research for
Yeah.
NASA and other commercial space companies.
Yeah, I want to talk a lot more about that in just a little bit. But about 6 years ago, you we were talking about space and going to space. Well, you were working for Blue Origin and their near space program. What was that first conversation like? Trying to figure out how you could create a vehicle that could take people in a near orbit and then bring them back to Earth safely.
Yeah, that was so I joined Blue in 2018, right when I retired from the Navy. At that point, the New Shepard program, which was that's their suborbital space tourism rocket, it had been going for the company had been around for I think at that point it was 18 years. It was founded in 2000, and I joined, and it was the ninth flight. My first week at Blue Origin, I went down for the ninth flight of that rocket. And little did I know at the time that 11 flights later we'd be flying our first human flight, which is about 4 years after that. But so the rocket was there, and it had gone through about four design iterations. So the rocket and the capsule, and interestingly enough, we had this, Jeff Ashby is former NASA astronaut, former Navy test pilot, shuttle commander. He was at Blue. He was our head of safety mission assurance, and he handed me a memo that he had wrote. And if Amazon, Jeff Bezos, the 6-page memo is the way the decisions are
Right.
made. So he handed me the 6-page memo that kind of laid out his vision for the customer astronaut experience, and he said, "I need somebody to run with this." He's like, I'm 1 foot out the door. I'm getting ready to retire someday. He's like, "Take this and see what you can make of it." And funny enough, I just kind of started doing that, and nobody told me to stop. So
Did you ever get a chance to go up in it and actually take a test or take a flight?
no, unfortunately,
Oh,
I did not get a chance to fly. But I may have an opportunity someday if things go really well for me. We did develop all of the training syllabus. We built the simulator. We built the training center. And on all of the launches, I was either in the control room as Capcom, capsule communicator,
yeah.
talking to the astronauts on the radio, or I was on the tower as crew member 7, which we would walk them up the tower. I would put them in the seats, make sure they're buckled in. I'd close the hatch, and then 15 minutes later, when they landed in the desert, I was there to open the hatch and welcome them back to Earth. And we called it crew member 7 because there are 6 seats in the capsule. So that person who trains you, and he lives and works with you the whole time you're on site in Texas, they're your 7th crew member. So you're there with them the entire journey.
I was always fascinated when I was growing up with the space shuttle and space flight, and I couldn't get enough of just watching it every time it launched. And I could always remember those few folks that were there on the tower, right, and helping the astronauts get into the vehicle. And I always thought those guys had the best job because they knew they could just walk away while they're locking somebody into a space capsule. That's
Yeah.
like, see ya, I'm gonna stay down here.
It what was really privilege is I mean, it is the entire experience for a person. It's awe-inspiring, it's life-changing, and you actually see the full scope of human emotion in about an hour's time frame between excitement and nervousness, and then you get up there and you put them in the vehicle, and all of a sudden it just got real.
Yeah.
And all the training and everything. So there's focus, but there's also nervousness. And then you see them come home and elation and awestruck, and was really moved when Bill Shatner came back from his flight. I mean, he came out with tears
Yeah.
literally rolling down his face. It was such an emotional experience for him. So it was a real privilege to get to do that.
My guest is Kevin Sproge. He's the CEO of Zero G Space Tourism. You can find them at .com or go0g.com. You can find them on the web right now. And you are with Zero G, the company that has a jet basically that takes people up, not quite to orbit, but you're up fairly high, in the same range, I think, in the 30,000, 35,000 foot range. So commercial airplane area. So you can let people feel what it's like to be weightless. I want to talk more specifically and go step by step through this flight process. But
Yeah.
describe what that initial feeling, that weightless experience is like when you're weightless? What does that feel like?
Um, the the simplest answer is it doesn't feel like anything,
Huh.
because you are truly weightless. One of the things that we see very, very commonly is they'll float up off the floor and they'll immediately try to swim,
Huh.
because in their brain, that is the thing that they are closest analog to, is like floating in water. Only because there's no water resistance, when you move your arms, nothing
Yeah.
happens.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
you just see kind of people kind of flailing around and kicking and trying to swim to control themselves, but they can't. So what's really interesting, the first time I did it, I found that it was much more benign than I was surprised by how benign it was. We have a reputation of it being a roller coaster ride, or it being really extreme. But when you actually float off the floor that first time in zero gravity, it's like nothing you've ever felt. There is no comparison to anything on Earth. Like I said, the closest thing is like floating in a pool, but there's no pressure, there's no anything. You are just completely free. You're unburdened by gravity, and you just float. And it is really, really interesting and neat experience. And it's unlike anything you'll ever get to do in your life.
Yeah, but like you said with the pool, at least I'm in there and I can feel the resistance of the water, and I can have some control of where I'm going up and down in my space, even if I'm in a deep pool, 12 feet or whatever, and I can move myself around in that weightless area. Like you said, when I've seen videos, it's just you're twirling and twisting, and you don't know how to stop it.
Yeah, it is a crash course in Newton's laws of motion. Because you've got no outside force to act on you. So if you start moving in a direction or you start rotating, you keep going until you come in contact with another person or the wall or something else, and can push off. So the key, and we tell people this as part of our pre-flight briefing, is if you start to move, just accept it, let yourself go. You are going to hit a wall eventually, and then you can push off and right yourself. But a lot of people, that is a very difficult thing for them to contemplate, is they feel like they're out of control, and you just got to kind of accept that I'm going right, and I'm going to go right until I hit the right wall, and then I can go left.
I believe you just have one plane for now, that Boeing 727. Are you based out of one airport, or do you travel around the country? Because I know you were in Colorado Springs.
Yep. Yeah, we were just in Colorado Springs the last 2 weeks. We were doing flights for U.S. Space Force, out of the Air Force Academy, and we were flying Space Force cadets, doing scientific research to support Space Force. We had some plant experiments on board. We had some gyroscopic experiments on board, and so that was really exciting.
And I bet it was
But
cool
yeah, the
because
plane.
you're a Navy guy, so being down with the Air Force folks, I bet that was pretty cool.
Well, it's always good to give some inter-service rivalry
Yeah.
comments. So
Right.
So unfortunately, we didn't have any Army cadets. The Army has the Commander in Chief's trophy this year,
Right.
and so both of us were talking about how we're going to take that back next year. Um, but yeah, the plane travels all around the country. We a couple of sites that we typically fly out of. I mean, we'll go anywhere, but we fly to Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Miami area. We fly to Kennedy Space Center on the shuttle runway,
Oh,
which is
neat.
really one of our top selling flights. People want to go and get a chance
Yeah.
to land on the shuttle runway. We fly to Ellington Field in Houston, which is right next to Johnson Space Center. We fly out of Long Beach, California. We fly to Seattle, Las Vegas, Dallas, Austin, New York City, up in the Boston metro area. We have flown out of Chicago and St. Louis, Kansas City before. We don't necessarily regularly go there, but we like to we bring the jet all over the place,
Yeah.
and we want as many people as possible to have the opportunity to experience it.
So when somebody signs up and then they meet you at the airport, what is the next step for them? They probably get, I would imagine, a safety briefing and probably some really cool jumpsuit.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So they show up on the morning of flight day, and they check in, and we do ID checks. We're a Part 121 certified air carrier. We operate under Everett's Air Cargo, so we meet all of the same requirements that United Airlines meets with security and maintenance and safety. So we are just like an airline in terms of the top level of safety and
So
compliance.
does that mean they have to go through the
Um,
TSA kind of check?
We do on-site TSA checks with a security contractor that meets and certified by the TSA to meet all their security programs. So you show up, we get ID check, you get checked in, you get your boarding pass, your name tag, and then you go get your zero-G flight suit. And that's yours to keep. You get to wear the flight suit on the flight. And then you go and we serve a NASA flight surgeon designed breakfast, which is mostly starches, and it is not a keto-friendly breakfast, but highly recommended. It helps settle the stomach, and it helps kind of fight any propensity for motion sickness. And then we do a pre-flight safety briefing for the whole crew. We have on board in the cabin, we have 2 flight attendants and 2 what we call coaches who are there to help you navigate your zero-G experience. And they give you some ideas of things that you can do that are fun in zero gravity. Introduce you to the 2 most important people on the plane, which are your photographers, who will get the post-worthy shots.
I would think it would be the pilots, but
oh no, for the people who fly with us, they definitely want to know where the photographers are at all times.
I'll bet. I'll bet.
And then about 45 minutes prior to the to takeoff, we go through TSA security on the plane, and then we're off.
My guest is Kevin Sproge. He's the CEO of Zero-G Space Tourism. You can find them at gozerog.com. You fly that Boeing 727. It's a little modified for these flights. So is it otherwise special in other ways to accommodate these flights? Could you use an Airbus? Could you use some other kind of plane?
Yeah, it's a matter of certification for what plane we use. So our airplane, it has some engineering modifications that make it capable of parabolic flight. On the inside of the airplane, we've got 38 seats. All the seats are in the back, and then the whole 65 feet of the airplane from this last seat all the way to the cockpit is just open space, and it's all padded. So we took a cargo conversion airplane to make that happen. It was just easier to make that, and we call that the floating zone. Other than that, it's a stock 727. In terms of using a different airplane, you would have to go through the entire process of certifying that airplane with the FAA, and also the aircraft manufacturer and the engine manufacturer. So our company was actually in flight test for almost 11 years before we got original certification from the FAA in 2004.
Oh, interesting. Because I was looking at the video of some of the flights that were happening, and you did have those seats, and I imagine that you're using the seats for takeoff and landing like you would for any other, and then you let them out. I saw that same thing on the Blue Origin. They were in their seats for takeoff and descent, but then they were able to unbuckle and then do your weightlessness.
Yep, that's exactly right. We just like an airliner, you're in your seat, seatbelt fastened up to 10,000 feet, seatbelt sign goes off, and we get everybody up, and we level off at altitude and go right into our parabolas.
Yeah, and it's like for regular people, it would be a roller coaster, if you will. You're just going up and going down and going up and down, right?
Yep. Just like that. The airplane climbs at about a 45-degree angle, and they start at about 23,000 feet. At about 35,000 feet, the pilots will push the controls over, and the airplane goes, it was over the top into a dive. And that's when you float, is during that pushover portion. And you get about 30 seconds of complete weightlessness. And then as they get to the bottom, back down to about 23,000 feet, the pilots then pull to level out and then start back up again. And everybody floats down to the floor. We have everybody lay flat on their back on the floor. And for the pulling, they pull about 1.8 Gs on the way up. So everybody, it doesn't hurt. It's not like flying a fighter where you're 7.5 or 9 Gs and you might pass out, but it just feels like a little bit of pressure. But we have everybody laying on the floor, and then they go right back up, push over again, and everybody floats again.
Does that weightlessness happen suddenly? Does all of a sudden, do you start floating, or do you feel that it's coming on?
It's not instantaneous, but as the push happens, and we have call outs inside the cabin. So, we'll say on the pull, that's when we're going up, and then they'll say pushing over. And then about 5 seconds after that pushing over call, you just float off the
Oh.
floor. You don't even need to push yourself. I mean, it just happens. And it's like I said, it's really
Yeah.
neat. It's really incredible.
And you said it lasts about 30 seconds or so. Why so short? It seems like I'm sure for the folks that are doing it for the first couple of times, it seems like that would be a long time. You know, me and TV and radio, 30 seconds isn't very long.
Yeah.
I can get a lot done in 30 seconds, but I can understand also that 30 seconds isn't a long time. Can you make it longer?
Not really. The physics of the maneuver, that's what defines the time that you're floating, is the time it takes to go from the climb into the descent, and then have to start pulling out to get to go into the next one. So NASA flew a 707. They flew a DC-9 variant on their parabolic program, and they were all about 30 seconds as well. It's just the physics of the maneuver that make it the time bound. That said, in a flight, we'll do 15 parabolas, which means you get 7.5 minutes of zero-G floating time. And while you're floating, 30 seconds seems longer than it
Right.
is. There's you can do quite a lot in 30 seconds.
And you said that feeling is like weightlessness. Now, I know you said you've never been in space, but if you talked to an astronaut and compared, the life of somebody who was in the ISS, your friend who's in the ISS right now, if I was in that your zero G plane and I was talking to him, would we have the exact same experiences?
Yeah, it is true zero gravity. It's not a simulation. It is, you are actually in a microgravity environment for those 30 seconds at a time. So the motion happens exactly the same as it does on orbit. Like I said, the rotation or you have to push off something to move. That's exactly how it is on ISS. The only difference is theirs is constant and ours is at 30 seconds at a time.
And then you said, as I'm speaking to Kevin Sproge, the CEO of Zero G Space Tourism, then you said when you start to level off again and you're going to have to climb up again, you have that gravity. So it's not a sudden slam. It's you start just descending slowly from inside the cabin.
Yep, that's exactly right. So as the pilots start to come on the pull, everybody just floats down to the floor, and then we have them lay down, and
Yeah.
so the G's come on gradually as they get to the bottom of the pull out.
And what is that? That must be a little bit unsettling, though, I would think, as a passenger, because you're going from zero G to 2G to zero G to 2G. I mean, you're going back and forth, so it must be a wild ride for all your organs and your brain and everything that's happening.
Yeah, we as long as you follow our recommendations, which is, like I said, lying flat on the floor, and we have people stare at a spot on the ceiling. As long as you don't move your head around while you're in that what we call hyper G phase, you'll be just fine. It just feels like pressure. Where folks start to get some motion sickness is they move their head around, their vestibular system in your inner ear. It scrambles their eggs a little bit. But the zero G portion of it, that's not where we see motion sickness ever at all. It's in the pulling out and moving your head around.
Huh. And you said you do it over and over and over again. How many times? I know you said I think it's 7.5 times you're going up and down. Could you go more, or is it just uncomfortable for people after a certain amount of time? You're like, all right, I'm kind of done with this.
Yeah, so we'll do 15 parabolas on a standard consumer flight, the tourism flight, and that is based on long experience that 99% of the population can tolerate 15 no problem, with no ill effects. When we fly research flights, we'll actually do 30 or more. But on those flights, what we see is as we get above 15, the incidence of motion sickness tends to start to increase fairly drastically. So 15 is the perfect number for our consumer flights so that everybody enjoys themselves and has a great time. The researchers who are there, doing serious stuff, they're usually okay if they get a little sick and they keep going.
Yeah, you mentioned that because it's not just rides for people who just want to feel weightless for for an afternoon. You are conducting a lot of these zero G or microgravity experiments and research up there. And one of the videos I was looking at, Somebody had a bottle of, I think it was like 7 Up, something like that, and was shaking it up, and you could really see how the bubbles weren't going out like they usually do under a gravity situation. So I'm sure there are other experiments that are helpful to people who can't just go to space.
Yeah, we bill ourselves as your first step into space for our researchers, and in fact, over 50 payloads that have flown on the International Space Station have come through our airplane first
Oh,
to do research and development. And one of the things we're most proud of is we would prefer that you bring your experiment on board and break it on board our airplane, so that when you get on orbit, you have a much higher success rate. Because if your experiment goes up on orbit and it breaks on the first day, you're stuck, and you get no research. So we do a lot of development and a lot of troubleshooting and a lot of test and evaluation for researchers who are on their way to ISS. And now we're seeing a lot of real demand for lunar research as well. So we can actually fly lunar parabolas at 1/6 gravity. It's just a slightly different pushover. So we'll do entire research flights where we'll just do 30 lunar parabolas. We'll do rovers. We're doing some lunar mining research, some 3D printing and lunar gravity research. In fact, in January, we had Collins Aerospace, who was building a new spacesuit for the ISS and also for the moon. We built a mock-up of the ISS airlock inside our airplane. And we had an NASA astronaut in the new spacesuit navigating the airlock inside the airplane for 2 straight days. And that was a key deliverable for them to pass their milestone review at NASA to show that they could do that.
Oh, sure. And I would think it would help for eventual. I know Elon Musk has talked about wanting to send people to Mars, so I'm sure this could help in those research efforts as well.
Yeah, the the long duration missions, especially the planetary ones, so lunar and also Martian, you've got multiple parts. You've got the launch, you've got the long duration zero gravity part, and then you've got a habitation in a less gravity environment. So Mars is 1/3 our gravity, and the moon is 1/6. We are that portion. So NASA has their giant swimming pool that they use in Houston, the Neutral Buoyancy Lab. That's great for zero gravity simulation. It doesn't work as well for lunar or Martian, because you have to take the suits and weigh them down to stick to the bottom of the pool. Now you're carrying a lot more mass and it's a lot harder to move. We are the only platform outside of the moon or Mars itself that can accurately simulate a lunar or a Martian environment from a gravity perspective. So we're unique in that manner.
And since you said that going back up, you are pushing 1.8, almost 2 Gs, could you also do then positive G experiments where you have somebody that's doing experiments under 2 or 3 or 4 Gs?
We're capable of doing that. Yeah, obviously the interest, you can do that in a centrifuge, very easily, and that's where most of that research happens. And we can't go above 1.8 Gs because we have limits to our airplane. So we can't, it's not an F-16 that can go 9 Gs, unfortunately.
Right. My guest is Kevin Sproge. He's the CEO of Zero G Space Tourism, and you can find him at gozerog.com, just the letter G there. I was reading on your research testing portion of your website, and there's a research test data summary sheet that you ask if the experiments of the people that are going to be doing the research, and you ask if the experiments are going to include any liquids or powders or dry ice. What kind of frozen dry ice experiments need 0G?
Yeah, so we regularly, one of the key areas of research that I mentioned for the long duration spaceflight is thermal management is a really important part of any spacecraft. And unlike on Earth, where you have, if your spacecraft is constantly in the glare of the sun, so one side of it is always hot, the other side's always cool. And so what they have is these cryogenic systems that circulate liquid through the spacecraft to take heat away from the hot side and radiate it to space on the cold side. And these cryogenic rigs, they'll be up to 20 feet long. and a lot of research by a lot of different laboratories and universities into long duration cryogenic experiments. And so we'll have nitrogen on board, we'll have cryogenic fluids, hydrogen, helium, those kind of things that are super cooled. And we routinely fly those at our research campaigns.
I would think that comes with some inherent danger, though, if you have some compressed liquid nitrogen up in an aircraft like that.
Yeah, so we have a very extensive process by which we go through all. We do a engineering review of all the experiments, and then we go through a test readiness review where we review all of the risks and make sure all of the risks are mitigated. And the installations on the aircraft are actually what are called engineering orders, so they comply with FAA requirements to be on the aircraft. So our safety review process to get the experiments on board is very thorough and very robust.
And I imagine there are probably people that have come to you saying, we want to test out this material or this substance, and it's probably either odd or messy or gooey in some way, and something you might not want in your airplane flying around at 0G.
Well, we will, we want to service the research community, and so we're willing to have a conversation with anyone. The key to getting the experiment on board is, can we mitigate the risk? So if we have a fluid, for example, that we definitely do not want to get out into the cabin, we'll say, okay, you have to have double containment on this fluid, and we have to have, venting overboard just in case, so that we have multiple redundant safety systems. But we're capable of flying quite a large number of things, things that you would not find in a normal airliner. I can say that.
But you can't really contain somebody if they start getting a little bit woozy, and that's maybe why you serve them that special breakfast, so they're not,
Right.
so they're not barfing there. I was on one of those other test flights when I was in high school. I was with a friend at the time, and it was coming up, and so the pilot gave her a map, and then so she's in the map. It was just awful. I can't imagine what your crew has to clean up there.
Yeah, no, I've got our crew's phenomenal, and they've been doing, we've been doing this for over 20 years, so we have very good processes and procedures to handle. We do offer Dramamine before every flight to folks.
And
like
then you're sleeping while it's weightless, so that's no
right.
good.
The breakfast is designed by a NASA flight surgeon to minimize stomach discomfort.
Yeah.
And then we also have a really neat product that we're using called a relief band, which looks like a wristwatch that you wear it on the inside of your wrist, and it stimulates the nerve that's that goes from your arm into your hand, and that actually somehow hijacks the brain between your stomach, the signal between your stomach and your brain, and prevents nauseation.
I've seen that for people on a cruise ship. I've seen that.
Same thing. Yep. And we've had great success with that product. And we offer that to anyone who wants one at every flight.
And then after your parabolics up and down, everybody's about tired, ready to come back to the ground. So you just head back to the ground and land like any other plane, right?
That's exactly right. Yep. When we finish up the parabolas, we get everybody back in the seats, seatbelts on, and we come back and land. And once we get everybody off the airplane, we do what we call a regravitation ceremony. Yeah. When you fly in the airplane for the first time, your name tag is actually upside down, which is a NASA tradition from their parabolic flight program, so that we can tell who the first timers are. And then when you get off the airplane, we flip your name tag right side up, and then you're allowed to wear your name tag right side up for any future flights.
Is there an adjustment period for those people who are just stepping off the airplane and they start walking on the ground again?
No, surprisingly enough, they regravitate fairly quickly back to normal.
But there also have to be some common words or phrases that you guys hear over and over again when they step out of the airplane for the first time, when they get on the ground after that kind of an experience.
Oh yeah, we hear amazement, wonderful. We hear life-changing experience. Little sometimes bewilderment, but it is my favorite part of the job is on that first zero gravity parabola when everybody floats off the floor for the first time. just the joy, I mean, just unmitigated joy on their faces as they're experiencing this thing for the first time is, and every flight, big smiles coming off the airplane because it truly is a unique experience that people get to do.
Yeah, and like anything, after a couple of up and downs, they probably get more used to it and then can start having more fun with it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. When I have two boys, one is 16, one's 19, and they got to fly with me a couple years ago. And my oldest, he's the more cerebral of the two. He just he floated, so he was just floating around, enjoying it. Kind of. My youngest, he was like a ping pong ball. I mean, just bouncing off the wall all the way down the cabin and then all the way back.
I have two daughters. I know they're 12 and 15, and it's the exact same thing. Older one would be calm. The younger one would be bing, 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 bing. Same same thing. I think it's that way with second children. What I think a lot of people are thinking, like I'm thinking, now, all right, so I'm ready to go. I would love to do this experience, but I'm sure it isn't like I'm buying a ticket on Southwest Airlines. So what are the prices involved in flying with you guys?
Yeah, so our list price for an individual seat is $9,900. And that gets you 15 parabolas. It gets you 7.5 minutes of zero gravity time. You can do that at any city that we offer. Like I said, you get the flight suit and the whole ceremony, the whole experience. It includes the whole photo package. You'll get photo and video of your flight. And we also offer, we charter the entire airplane, and that goes for about $270,000. And that's, corporations and media productions. We've done commercials, we've done movies. We just recently did a music video for Elf Cosmetics that's going to be coming out. We've done an episode of The Bachelorette. That was a couple years ago. So we could pretty much do it all. There's a lot of interesting things we can do with the airplane.
So when I go to your website, go0g.com, and then I could sign up, but what if you only have, I think you said that you have 36 seats on there, and I'm sure you want to sell all of them like any other, like any airline would. Let's say you only sold 20 seats. Would you still go?
We would. Yep. We do have a number of a minimum number of seats that we need to sell to fly. But as long as we meet that minimum, we'll fly if we're not 100% full.
Yeah, and then you said that the group can do it as well, so you can just rent out the whole thing. And could you go for a longer duration? So let's say if I had a group or I had, like you said, a movie, could we not just do the 15? Could we go and do it longer than what the average person could do?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, there's additional charges for additional parabolas, but we cater to whatever the customer needs.
And when I was looking at the website, it looks like you guys were sold out. So it looks like you're doing okay.
We're doing good. We typically fly about 80% full on. That's our average long term over 20 years. We do regularly sell flights out, and when we sell a flight out in a city, we add another flight. We're doing real well. We're going to be in Denver at the end of July, flying out of Denver International. So that's one that hopefully your listeners would consider us for. We're going to be back in Colorado Springs with the Space Force, and then we're going to come down the hill and do a couple flights out of Denver International.
Oh, that's awesome. So where do you go from here as a company? Do you look at getting another plane so you can expand your flights around the country? And I know you were talking about some of the regulations that you have to go through, but is it worth it to get another plane and try to expand what you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, couple of big news on the expansion front. We are actively sourcing a second aircraft. I'm looking at another 727 because obviously I already have the certification for that. That's the kind of the easiest path forward. But I'm also looking at potential for other aircraft that we can move into the future. The 727s, they're getting a little long in the tooth, and spare parts are a challenge for these airplanes. So if we get something a little more modern, we can get more longevity. We're also aggressively expanding internationally. We've signed a letter of intent with a South Korean company to bring zero gravity Asia to the South Korean and Japanese markets. We're also in discussion to have subsidiaries in other countries in the world as well. And that is really exciting. I think, the interest in commercial space is really exploding, all not just in the country, but all across the world. Certainly, guys like Elon Musk and SpaceX are helping to fuel that, and people are thinking this is something I can really do. It's not something that is completely out of reach, and feels a little bit like the internet felt in the late '90s. It's just about to break out, and so I think we're well positioned to really take advantage of people's desire to experience what spaceflight's going to feel like.
And you mentioned the long duration, how old some of these planes can be. There are a lot of stresses, you would think, that are put on an aircraft like that when you're going up and down and up and down and doing it repeatedly. Is that a concern for you, or a concern for the passengers that get on the flight?
No, surprisingly enough, because we operate the airplane within its existing limits, and we follow all of the FAA mandated maintenance inspections that any airliner would, and over 20 years of flying this airplane, we have actually found that the maximum stress that the airplane ever experiences is if we have to happen to fly through a thunderstorm. The parabolas themselves, we've never had any kind of an airframe issue. We've never had an engine issue. The parabolas themselves are not a driver of fatigue or stress on the airplane, surprisingly enough.
You also briefly mentioned, as we were wrapping up here, as I'm speaking with Kevin Sproge, the CEO of Zero G Space Tourism, you were talking about space tourism, and where do you think it's going to go from here? Do you see only more of the Blue Origin flights and more with Elon, what he's doing? And I know Richard Branson was trying to get into some of these flights as well. Could you see only an exponential increase in these type of flights and the interest in these?
I do. I think, like I mentioned, it feels very much like the internet felt back in the late '90s. 25, almost 30 years ago now. The We're finally getting to a kind of a critical mass of where the commercialization of space is starting to bring the cost down and make it accessible to everyday people. Blue Origin is going to continue to fly New Shepard. They're working on their next rocket called New Glenn, which is an orbital class rocket. Obviously, SpaceX is they're launching almost every day. Their consumer version of Starship, their astronaut version of Starship, I think is going to hold 200 people, is what they plan for orbital flights, and those are they want those to be tourist type flights. Virgin Galactic is in the project. They just flew their last flight in their current vehicle. They're going to spend a year developing their next vehicle, which is going to, I think, double or triple their capacity for astronauts. So as you get more opportunity, the costs are going to come down, and more people are going to get to experience this. And I think that's great. I think the democratization of space is it's a positive thing. It's a positive thing for us as a country. It's a positive thing for humanity. And one thing that Jeff used to say when I was at Blue Origin was, if we can just get the people up there, they will figure out how to make it successful and how to make money doing it. So as we get more and more people on orbit and to the moon and to Mars, we're going to see really neat entrepreneurial ideas that are going to make it profitable.
Is there room in the air and in the low Earth orbit for all of these flights?
There is space. Space is a really big place. You hear a lot about how crowded it is, but and while that is true, there's mitigations for some of that, but there's also plenty of room for all this activity that's going to happen.
Yeah, and there were some shows like The Expanse and the other one that was on Amazon with going to the moon and then going to Mars. I can't remember the name of it for some reason. But do you see that in the future? Could these flights and your flights lead to colonization and having people actually living on the moon or living eventually on Mars?
I do. I think potentially not in my lifetime, but I do think that humanity's future is in colonizing first our solar system and then potentially beyond. The theory is that we've got the Earth, which is a really special home, but it is right now all of our eggs are in that basket. And if something catastrophic were to happen, either self-induced or something terrible like a Yellowstone volcano, decides to go, I mean, that's it. It's game over. So by spreading out within our solar system, we guarantee the future of humanity. And I think that's the direction it's going to go.
Wow. Yeah, For All Mankind was the name of that show I was thinking about.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure you saw that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm a space junkie.
I'll bet. I'll bet. Now, I would think that these guys who are creating these shows probably have some good ideas, and probably are some of these ideas are coming from what they're hearing from the space industry, and it's a little bit of both, some imagination and some actual, real, practical things that you are doing as well as the other folks are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. The neat thing about science fiction is it's a lot of it is based in the science. The Expanse especially was the physics of how the spacecraft move, how the people move inside the spacecraft. When they're under thrust, they have gravity, and then when they cut thrust, they go to zero gravity. All of that is physics based. It's all based on real science. Yes, they've colonized Mars. They've colonized the asteroid belt. That is, on the fiction side. But the how things work and some of those books and TV shows are all based on real science, and that's how it would really happen sometime in the future.
Well, I wish you all the best, Kevin. It's fascinating what you're doing, as well as what all the folks that are working in space and low orbit, near orbit. All this stuff is pretty fascinating stuff. Kevin Sproge, the CEO of Zero G Space Tourism. You can again find them at gozerog.com. Hey, this was great. I appreciate it very much. That was fantastic.
Good. Yeah, me too. It was fun.
Yes, it most certainly was. You can find them at gozerog, just the letter G.com. And that's their website. When I first contacted them to be on the show, they offered me a ride in the plane. They were flying out of Colorado Springs, which for me really isn't too far from at least my house. But it was the weekend that we were moving our newsroom from the old building to the new building, and they were giving out tours, and it was our first real chance to get stuff over there. And it was a almost kind of mandatory deal to go over there, and it worked out better, and I wasn't able to go to this test flight. It was also the weekend my girls were out of town for a baton twirling competition down in Dallas, so it didn't work out where I could go down to the Springs and do that test flight. But after my talk with Kevin, he told me they are coming back to Colorado Springs, and they're also going to be doing some flights in Denver at the end of July. And so if the timing works, I might get another chance to go and experience it, and then I would report back to you, of course. I would be, I think, much less nervous about a flight like this than being on one of the on that Blue Origin flight where you're actually on a rocket. And I'm sure the rocket experience could probably not be duplicated. The speed, the exhilaration, the excited terror of liftoff. How can you recreate that when you're strapped to a rocket? The weightlessness, I think, would be interesting on the rocket because it's a longer lasting all at one time rather than the zero G plane that is only about 30 seconds at a time, and you're doing it several times up and down and up and down and up and down. So I think having that longer lasting zero G feeling would be interesting. But I think with the zero G plane, you probably get, all right, so your first experience, you're flying all over the place. Your second one, you're just starting to get the hang of it. And after probably the fourth or fifth time you experience the weightlessness, you probably have enough experience to know how to bounce around, keep your head straight, to do some interesting tricks, to do maybe a front flip or a back flip or just spin weightless. I think that it would be at least a better learning experience in that way on the plane than it would be on the rocket. And then you have, if you're on the rocket, then you have that controlled, restless anticipation of landing safely as the vehicle returns to Earth because it parachutes back to the ground. So you're hoping that those stay intact. But we've all been in a plane, right? And we all know the feeling of being in a plane, and sometimes it has some turbulence, so you get that feeling. And you all have the feeling of what it's like to take off and land in a regular airplane. So I think it'd be an interesting experience. We'll see if it happens. And I would obviously report back to you and if it does. Anyway, I think it's an interesting concept. Thanks again for being here. Thanks for listening. And until next time, I'm Jason Luber, the traffic guy. Be safe, and as always, happy motoring.